Good afternoon. Penny and I got a chance to go over and see Johnny O'Day this morning, and she's also having some heart arrhythmia, so they would both appreciate, I'm sure, our prayers on that, and as Joyce said, her MRI is tomorrow, so on that. So, I came in today and I called Carrie Wells Penny twice, and I guess when the mind goes, it's not good. Anyway, all right. Today I was thinking about something. I had something happen. It's been quite a while ago now, but I was thinking about it this morning. So I was thinking about my sermon. I gave a sermon one week at a church area, and it hasn't been recent. It hadn't been around here. But I gave a sermon on prophecy, and I don't remember exactly too much, the details, except it was a sermon on prophecy, which I do give from time to time. And anyway, afterwards, a man who I knew a little bit but not very well came up to me and asked me when I was going to be back in this particular church area to speak on prophecy again. And I said, well, I don't know when I'll speak on prophecy. I speak on prophecy routinely from time to time, but I don't really know for sure when that would be. And he said, well, I just want to come when you're going to speak on prophecy. And I thought, well, is that the only reason to come? So what I wanted to talk about today was, it is very important to warn the world. It's very important to let the world know that we know the world's falling apart. We know our country's in serious problems, and we know there's a lot of things in this world that just are not right, that needs to be corrected by the return of Jesus Christ. So what I'm going to talk about today in no way diminishes the fact that we need to make sure we preach what is happening. But I want to take a look initially at a scripture that I think is quite frightening, and it's over in Matthew 25. Matthew 25. And again, what I'm going to talk about today in no way diminishes what I just said, but I think this is something we really need to all think about, and certainly I know I need to think about it. It's a parable from Jesus Christ. So these are the words of Jesus Christ. It's not the words of Paul or Peter or any of the apostles even. These are the words of Jesus Christ. And it's beginning in verse 31 of Matthew 25. Jesus Christ says, if you got a red letter Bible, it's in red, when the Son of Man comes in his glory. So this is the return of Jesus Christ. When he returns in his glory and all the holy angels are with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, a time we all long for, do we not? First resurrection. All the nations will be gathered together before him, and he will separate them one from another as a shepherd separates or divides his sheep from the goats. And he'll say to the sheep on the one hand, or on the right hand, it's got here, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. It's been, this has been not something that just happened. It's been going on for quite some time. And he said, for I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me, and I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him and say, Lord, when did we see you hungry? Or when did we see you thirsty and didn't give you drink? When did we see you a stranger, didn't take you in, or naked, didn't clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison, and we didn't come to you? And then the King, Jesus Christ, will answer and say, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you, somebody's not happy. Where am I? Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. And then he will say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Again, this is a parable. Analogies all break down to some degree, but he's trying to tell us something. And they'll say, well, when did I not do these things? Just the opposite of what he's telling those that have been doing these things. Now, when I compare myself to those who he praises, I can see I come up short. And when you see it, you can probably see you come up short. But yet, the point of the matter, I believe, is how much are we trying? How much are we trying? So I think it's safe to say, in fact, I feel confident in saying that Jesus Christ and God the Father watches how we treat other human beings. It is very, very important. And it's very easy to look and minimize things like this, but it's not. It's very important to God. That's what I'm trying to get across. So I asked myself, what is the most important thing to God? And if you want to title my sermon, I've got what is most important to God. Again, in no way am I trying to diminish many of the things of warning about what's about to happen and various things like that. But what is God really looking for in the whole scope of what we as a Christian are supposed to do? Now, when I ask myself the question, I think, well, we need to look for an example. And what better example? There is no better example than Jesus Christ. So I think what I'd like to do for the next, I think it'll probably take, I'm going to take one of the Gospels, and I'm just going to do a real brief survey of several chapters of the Gospel. It'll probably take maybe 20 minutes at the most. But we can take any Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, which is where we're going to see the way Jesus Christ operated when he was on earth, and we can take a look at, get a real, not just a clue, but I think it can be like a 2x4 hitting us over the head, realize what he's doing and what he's saying. Now, I'm going to take Mark. Mark's the shortest gospel. I could take any of them, but most people, I say Bible scholars, whatever you want to call it, most feel that Mark was probably the first gospel written. Some think it's Matthew, but most think it's Mark. It's Matthew or Mark is what you'll usually hear. Luke's probably the third, and John, more than likely, was the last gospel written, and it was written probably later than the others. Most feel that John was probably not written to the 90s, which, 55, 60 years after Jesus Christ died and was resurrected. But let's just look at Mark. I'm not going to read much at all. I just want to give a little sort of a Cliff Notes of Mark and look at Jesus Christ. So if you want to turn to Mark, and like I say, you can read it later. Certainly don't have time to read a lot, but I think we can get a scheme of what Jesus Christ is looking for as we take a look at this. Now, Mark chapter 1, I'll just read verse 1. This is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So Mark, the entire gospel, most think, I guess you could say, that Peter was the conduit that gave Mark most of this information, what he wrote. So we start reading about Mark, we read about John the Baptist, but just going to hit some points here. Verse 12 and 13, we see Jesus Christ being tempted by Satan. We drop down to verse 16, Jesus is calling the disciples. Again, I'm just pointing some things out. You can read it for yourself later. Verse 21 to 39 of Mark chapter 1, we see Jesus Christ casting out demons and healing. Casting out demons and healing. Verse 40 to 45 of chapter 1, he's healing again. So we see right here in the first chapter him being tempted, calling his disciples, obviously preaching the truth of the gospel, the kingdom, and healing. Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2. Quick drink of water here. Verse 1 through 3, you see Jesus preaching and healing a paralytic man. Dropping down to verse 13, he calls Matthew, Matthew, who we feel wrote the Gospel of Matthew. Verse 18, we see him being questioned about fasting. Dropping down to verse 23, again, just cliff notes here, how Jesus Christ says he is the Lord of the Sabbath. He kept the Sabbath, but he's the Lord of the Sabbath. Mark chapter 3, moving on, we see what in verse 1 through 6, Jesus Christ healing on the Sabbath. Again, he's healing, and he's healing on the Sabbath. And they were saying, well, you shouldn't be doing this on the Sabbath. Well, he was healing on the Sabbath. Verse 7 through 14, we see him healing again, and we see him again talking about choosing the 12 apostles to continue to do the work. Verse 20, he talks about a house that is divided cannot stand. And they were accusing him of being, like influenced by Satan. And he's saying, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Verse 31, his mother and his brothers think he's going crazy. His mother and his brothers, after what we've seen happening here, think he's going crazy. Mark chapter 4, we see first one, I guess you could say, the parable of the sower. Verse 10 and 11, I think I'll read verse 10 and 11 because he's telling all these parables. He's going to explain these parables. But in verse 10 and 11 of Mark 4, verse 10, but when he was alone, those around him with the 12 asked him about the parable. What parable? The parable of the sower, which we've probably had explained many times. And he said to them, who did he say to? Those around him who were with the 12. He said, to you it has been given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God. But to those who are outside, all things come in parables. It was not their time to understand yet. Now in verse 13, we see him explaining the parable of the sower, the next few verses. Then in verse 21 of Mark 4, he tells us to let our light shine, or telling the apostles and telling those who are following him, let your light shine. Verse 26, he gives a parable about a seed growing. Verse 30, parable about the mustard seed. Verse 33, he explains about these parables again. Verse 35, we see how even the wind obeys Christ. Remember, there was in the water and the wind was blowing, and he told the winds to stop, and it stopped. Moving down to Mark 5, Mark chapter 5. Verse 1 through 3, a demon-possessed man comes to Christ asking for help, and Christ sends the demons into a pack of swine. Remember, they run off into the water and drown. Verse 21 to 29, we see Jairus, one of the rulers, synagogue. He comes to him for help, and while he's doing it, a woman touches Jesus Christ and is healed. And he said, because of your faith, you're healed. Verse 30 to 43 heals Jairus' daughter. Verse 42 and 43, I'll read verse 42 and 43 here of Mark chapter 5, just to give us a flow of where we are. Verse 42, Mark 5. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years old. Healed a little 12-year-old girl. And they were overcome with great amazement. They could not understand what was going on, the people. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it. And he said that something should be given her to eat. Moving down to Mark chapter 6 now. Verse 1, he goes to his own hometown of Nazareth and he preaches to them. Verse 1 and 2, he preaches to them and he doesn't get a good reception. They're quite frankly very angry with him for preaching the truth to his own hometown. Verse 7, he sends out his apostles. He gives them power over unclean spirits. Then we see John beheaded, John the Baptist, who was the forerunner, was he not? Then we see Christ feeding 5,000 or more, probably more than that, with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Verse 45, we see Jesus Christ walking on the sea. 53 to 56. Well, let's just look at that real quickly. Mark 6, 53 to 56. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret, and they anchored there. When they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, and they ran through the whole surrounding region and began to carry about on beds those who were sick wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered into a village, cities, or country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him that they might touch the border of his garment, and as many as touched him were made well. Mark chapter 7. It begins by talking about how we become defiled, not by eating something that may have, germs on it or something like that. People have used this to say, oh, he said you can eat anything, clean or unclean. No, he didn't say that. He says, if you eat something that has dirt or something on it, don't mean to. That's not what really defiles you. What defiles us is the filth within our heart. Verse 10, he talks about honoring our father and our mother, one of the 10 commandments. Verse 24 to 30, he heals a demon-possessed daughter. Verse 31 to 37 of Mark 7, he heals a deaf man. As we move into chapter 8, I ask you to consider for a moment here, how is our example conducting himself? Jesus Christ, how is he conducting himself? Ask yourself, what is his main focus? Mark 8. We turn to Mark 8 and we see him now feeding 4,000 with 7 loaves and a few small fish. And then verse 11 and 12, Pharisees ask for a sign. In verse 13 to 21, he asks them, why don't you understand what's going on? Why didn't they understand? Well, they were looking for a conquering Messiah. They were looking for someone that was going to come in and release them from the Roman. They're looking for somebody that's going to release them and give them their power back. They didn't understand. Verse 22 to 30, he healed a man, and Peter, that's when he came to understand that he was the Messiah. Very critical part of his ministry. Why did Peter understand? Well, the Jews were looking for a conquering ruler, and Christ had been doing something all this time, but it wasn't coming in yet to be a conquering ruler. He was coming for another reason, was he not? Which he preached in Nazareth, his synagogue, when they got all mad at him. Now, I could turn to Luke and read that, but it would take too much time. What he preached, they didn't like. They wanted power back. So what was Christ doing all this time up to this point? In verse 31 of Mark 8, he predicts his death. Verse 34 to 38, I think we'll turn there, because he tells the disciples, the apostles, what they need to do if they want to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Verse 34, Mark chapter 8. And when he had called the people to him with his disciples also, he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself or herself, take up your cross and follow me. Follow Jesus Christ and God the Father, what they are doing. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. For what will it profit a man or a woman if they gain the whole world and loses their own soul? Or what will a man or woman give in exchange for their soul? For whoever is ashamed of me, my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, yes, it was bad then too. Of him, the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Well, when we read right at the beginning of Matthew 25 that Christ is returning with the angels. Are they not? Now, I could continue, but we're already up to chapter 9. And chapter 9 through 11 has several of the same things again, but we see him making his way to Jerusalem. And the latter part, chapters 7 through, is basically when he goes to Jerusalem, is arrested, he's crucified, then he's resurrected. What is the point of all that we have seen from Jesus Christ up into this time? Well, let's turn one verse we skipped over. I quoted it. I said Mark chapter 8, verse 11 and 12. But let's read Mark 8, 11 and 12. Because the Pharisees, the religious leaders, those that really felt they were doing quite well, they came out and they began to dispute with him. Well, what had they just done before he had just fed 4,000 people? And the Pharisees, they came out and began to dispute with him. And they were seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, what does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly, I say to you, no sign should be given to this generation. But yet, wasn't something happening? Wasn't he doing something? Wasn't he healing and preaching and teaching and showing the world that he cared? Was he not? You know, I've had the opportunity over the years worked in healthcare a lot. Now, I remember when I came into the church years ago, I sold healthcare, hospital supplies. Basically, we sold everything but pharmaceuticals because that's a totally different area. And I began to wonder if I should quit my job and take another job because maybe it was wrong to be in this field. And I remember going to the pastor and talking to him, and he didn't tell me what to do, but he let me see that, well, you know, you have to decide. And over the years, I look back and I think, what if I'd have just quit? I don't know how my life would have turned out. I'm not saying it would have been better or worse, but I look at all the people I've known over the years and all the opportunities that I've had. And I remember I now work, you know, at two of the hospitals in the area, and I don't work there. I normally work 2 days a week, but lately I've been working a lot more. But hopefully I'll only work 2 days a week this week because it's going to be cold. But anyway, I see a lot of people. I see a lot of things, a lot of sad things, a lot of good things. I just was thinking, I remember one situation recently. I was down there on one of the floors, first floor, stocking their products, and one of the techs came in. And the techs, you know, they're registered nurses and they're techs. And the techs don't get paid near as much as the registered nurses, and they don't get a huge salary, the nurses even. But I actually make more than the techs. And one of the techs came in. She was a younger girl. She was probably in her 20s. And I asked her how her day was going, and she told me how bad it was and how nobody showed up, and she was there by herself and all the stuff she's having to do. And, you know, I mean, it was, well, I mean, I'm sorry about that, but, you know, I got my own problems. But I didn't say that. But the same girl, this very same girl who's a tech, I wonder, why did she go into this job? And I think it's because in her own way she cared and wanted to help. And I remember walking down the hall later, a few days later, and I just happened to see her in one of the patients' rooms. And there was a patient in bed, and I think they had a couple of family members in there, and I heard her say, I didn't go in the room, I just heard her say, yes, My grandmother died not long ago, and I know it's really hard. And she was there explaining to these people how she cared. And I thought, well, you know what? That's pretty impressive to me. So Jesus Christ, could we not see what he's doing, what he was doing? Well, Jesus Christ came to serve mankind. And many of those that saw it couldn't even see it, could they? They couldn't understand it. They couldn't get it. They didn't realize that he came for a lot bigger purpose than giving the Jewish people their power back. You know, there was a gentleman in one of the church areas several years ago, and he was a college professor, and he had retired. He had a son who had some bad health, and he was in pretty bad shape. And he was in a hospital for quite a while. He was in a couple different hospitals. But one of them was, it was in Murfreesboro, Tennessee is where it was. But I knew some of the people, some of the nurses, and when this particular boy was in the hospital, I went to one of the nurses and asked them, what's going on? And they can't tell information. You know, they're not supposed to give information, but the guy looked at the chart, this nurse, who was a male nurse, and said, I'll just tell you this, he's not going to die, which he didn't. He died a few years later, but he didn't. And this particular father, I'll never forget him saying, he hadn't attended church too long. He'd probably been attending church a couple of years or so, but he said one of the greatest experiences of his life was getting to know the members of the Murfreesboro congregation, because so many of them served them while his son was sick. Mankind wants a hero. Look at the election commercials. They try to outdo each other as to what they can do, and they were very, very quick to point out all the flaws of their opponents. And yet there are a lot of flaws all over the place, are there not? Do we ever do this in the Church of God? You bet we do. You bet we do. Mankind wants a leader. Mankind wants a hero. The greatest leader that ever was on earth was Jesus Christ. The greatest hero is Jesus Christ. What did he come to do? He came to serve mankind, did he not? I remember several years ago, congregation I used to attend, there was a boy. He was about 30 years old, but he was like retarded, I guess is the word I should use. I don't know if that's the best way to, but he had not grown in his mental capacity. And I remember going to a baseball game once, and Michael Jordan, who was a great basketball player, he tried baseball for a couple of years, and he didn't really do that good. But my son wanted to go out to see Michael Jordan because he was in town. In fact, I think he played for Birmingham, if I remember right. And so we went out to this baseball game in Nashville, and Michael Jordan was there. And Michael Jordan never even got in the game. And the stadium was virtually sold out to see Michael Jordan, who never even got in the game. And then when the game was over, they all wanted to go down there and see Michael Jordan. So he had a bus out there. They had a bus, all the players. You know, we stood around for 30 minutes waiting for Michael Jordan to come out. And there's probably, I don't know, a couple hundred people still there. And Michael Jordan finally came out. He never even turned around and acknowledged the fans. Just walked straight to the bus, got in the bus, and they took off. Now, I got nothing against Michael Jordan. I'm sure he's got his good points. But I thought, he didn't even turn around. If he had just taken a piece of his chewing gum and thrown it, they'd probably knocked each other over to get it. But that same night, there was a member in the Nashville congregation, because I went to get ice cream for my son and I, and in line was a member of the Nashville congregation, a young man, probably in his 20s at the time, and he was there in line with this young kid, or actually, kid was older than him, but the one that was mentally challenged, to buy him an ice cream and to take him to the game. And I'm thinking, what a good example that was, that young man wanted to help out someone else. What does God really want from you, and what does God really want from me? I've been an elder for over 30 years. I've been a pastor a number of years. I'm not now, but I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of good things, and I've seen not so good things. And I've got my share of faults, plenty of them, but I've seen a lot. And I asked myself, what does God really want from us? What's God looking for? Well, over in John chapter 12, John chapter 12. John, as I said, was probably written several years later than the three others, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Most think John was written later. But in chapter 12 of John, verse 23 to 26, Jesus Christ says, "The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified." He was about to be arrested and crucified. "Most assuredly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain." Except our garden in Athens, it didn't produce a lot of anything. That wasn't in my notes. It just kind of bothers me. It really started doing good about the time it was going to freeze and it was all going to die. Anyway, that was what they call that, a excursus or something. He who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternity, eternal life. "If anyone serves me," Jesus Christ said this. This is not my words. Jesus Christ said, "If anyone serves me, let him follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, my Father, him or her, my Father will honor." Will honor. Will honor. You know, I was thinking about this as I was even speaking here. There's a lot of people I meet, a lot of people I see at the hospitals. Hey, they're out there trying to make it through life. They're good ones and they're not so good ones, but as a rule, there's a lot of good people out there for what they understand, what they know. And I remember right after, I think it was right before New Year's. So I was in one of the hospitals, and there was one nurse that's probably, if I had to say, she's probably my favorite nurse. But I don't see her very often at all because her schedule's almost never, same as mine, or different places, different times. But I was walking down the hall, and I don't know, it was late December, and I heard somebody calling my name. It was her. And so I went down there, and she told me, she wanted me to know about, she's an emergency room nurse, that a little baby came in on Christmas Day that was unresponsive, and how they tried and tried to get that baby heart beating, and they just couldn't get it to beat, and how horrible it was. And then she asked me too, "Did you have a good Christmas?" I didn't think it was probably the best time to tell her I didn't keep Christmas. I don't keep Christmas. Christmas is pagan. So what if I said, "Don't you know Christmas is pagan?" We know these things, and we need to stand up for what we believe. That's not the point. But there was my friend that I work with, all disturbed because they lost a little baby. What is God looking for in us? What does God want his Christian fellowship to do? John 15. You know, when I was in Dallas, one of my pastor letters, I was during the COVID, which brought out a lot of thoughts and things. During COVID, there were all these different opinions. And I can tell you right now, I didn't get the COVID shot. There's my confession. But I didn't get it. Penny didn't get it. And I got COVID. I'm still alive. I think Penny's name's Carrie Wells, but, you know, other than that. but anyway, I actually put out one of my pastor letters to the folks. And I said, please quit telling each other what you need to do. Because some was saying, you've got to get that shot. Others saying, how dare you get that shot? I said, please, just let it be up to the person. The very next day, I got an email telling me how I need to make sure those people get that shot. And I thought, I hope they didn't read my pastor letter. But I thought, well, can we just, with the mask thing, oh, how dare you not wear a mask? This is off the subject, but I saw one of the nurse practitioners, just a nice girl. I mean, she's probably in her 40s. But I saw her the other day, and I told her, I said, you know, we had 17 COVID patients on the third floor on the other hospital. And she said, you know, I've never gotten COVID. She says, I don't know how I haven't gotten COVID. She says, I'm around them all the time. I haven't gotten. She said, I'm so worried. She had a mask on, in fact. She said, I'm so worried about getting COVID. And I said, well, you know, I've had it twice. First time was pretty bad, but I'm still going. And I said, you know, I didn't even get the shot. She kind of looked at me. So I got the feeling she may have got the shot, but I didn't care. And I said, you know, I didn't get the flu shot. And they would pay me. They would give me money to get the flu shot. I don't care if you get the flu shot. I care if we treat each other with love. That's what I care about. And I have to worry about it myself. I know I don't always do as well as I should. But yet, she was real nice and didn't say, you fool, I didn't tell her to take off her mask either. Because she's a good nurse practitioner. John 15, as I start to wrap this up. Verse 14 to 17. John 15, 14 to 17. That Passover night, Jesus Christ. In fact, let me start with verse 12. We'll read 12 to 17. This is my commandment, that you love one another. I've seen people that just get hard and want to say, we're so much better. Hey, none of us deserve by how good we are. We are sinners that want to please God. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. This is what Jesus did. If you're my friends, if you do what I command you, he said. I no longer call you servants, for a servant doesn't know what his master's doing. But I've called you friends, for all things I heard my Father I've made known to you. Now notice this next verse. You didn't choose me. It's not like you go choose a church or choose a whatever you do. No, you didn't choose me, but I chose you, Jesus Christ said. And I appointed you. Now, what did he appoint them to do? What he appoints us to do? That you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, and whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. Doesn't mean we ask for a new car or money, just he'll give us what we need. These things I command you, that you love one another. I'm honored and blessed to be able to work in those two hospitals because I've met a lot of people that I would have never met. In fact, oh man, Penny came to lunch the other day. She hadn't been there. She always hears me talking about some of my friends there, so several of them went to lunch with me, and the next day, she knows what I'm about to say, my boss, who I've known for years before, was telling the other employees that she's not really my wife. I hired her to come have lunch with me where it looked like I was impressive enough to have a beautiful wife. Yeah, no, that wasn't very nice of him, was it? No love there. So how can we serve? How can we serve? Well, let's turn back to, we'll close in Matthew 25 again. We see what's going on in the world. It's not good. We see what's going on in our country. It's not good. We see all the things that are happening, and you can't do a lot about that. It's that pray about it and pray for Christ's returns. Verse 34 of Matthew 25. The king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, you gave me food." Now this is just a principle he's trying to get across to us. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was in prison, you came to me. And it's talking about brethren. It's not saying we have to go out to every prison, to every member in the prison. It's talking about people we know, we care about, whether we're family or friends. Then the righteous will say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, or feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in? When did we see you naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say, "I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren," and the brethren is the church, and quite frankly, in many ways, the brethren is those we get to know in the world. As much as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. So what is most important to God? Well, what should be most important to us is that God will send Jesus Christ back in the kingdom. But while we're here, God wants us to learn what it is to love each other and to love mankind.